Asia Tech Podcast with Graham Brown and Michael Waits.
Hello, welcome to ATP Stories. We are all about the stories that make the Asian tech ecosystem so exciting. And today, to help us share a story with us, with the presenters, my name's Graham Brown and Michael Waits. Joining me in the studio, we have a partner in SeedPlus, a relatively new fund set up for the Asian market. They're supported by Google and PWC in Singapore. We're going to talk about his journey, becoming a partner in SeedPlus, all the way from California to Singapore, learning about becoming a VC, how their fund is structured, as well as the kind of deals that are involved in the Asian market, as well as advice. You know, if you're looking to start out and you want to become involved in the VC industry or that side of things, that side of the table, Michael's going to share with you some advice about what he's learned in the process, whether it's turned out as expected, what kind of things he's learned in becoming a VC. Welcome to the show, Michael Smith.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much.
It's Michael Waits, so we'll try to get around the confusion of which Michael is talking about. I think our voices are different enough. It's really bad too because we were talking before we went to record, right? That we have at least the name in common, and you know, you said you like to sort of. I'll use my own words about me, so I can get into a rant a little bit. Maybe we'll have a little competition on that as well.
Rant on.
But also, you're from California, so I was born in Santa Barbara County. So, and I'm older than you, obviously, but not so much, to be fair. But
I'm pretty old, so.
So yeah, like so when people ask me how old I am, I like to say 72 because it confuses them, but because I'm not 72. But that just kind of is what it is.
Born in the year of, maybe.
Yeah.
No, that was me. I'm born in the year of 72.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got Smithy and Waitsy, and let's
Smitty,
go.
so we can tell a little story here. So because I've always had this naming problem,
right.
When I joined one of my first startups in San Francisco, it was WebLogic, which is pretty famous. It was bought by DEA and later Oracle. When I started, my boss was named Michael, and a guy I worked with was named Michael, and yet the company was only about 20 people or 25 people when I started. So one of the guys I worked with is German. His name's Carl, and he just said, well, this Michael thing is not going to work. From here on out, your name is Smitty. Yeah. And basically that stuck with me because I was in my late 20s. But when I joined SeedPlus and I could get any email I wanted because there are no other Michaels, I reset the naming clock and told everybody to call me Michael, but a lot of people in the region will know me as Smitty, actually.
Fair enough.
Little trivia for everybody.
Yes, I guess that's what your friends call you, Smitty.
I actually try to get everybody to call me Michael because it's such a work thing, but, you know, for the purposes of this podcast and keeping the name confusion down, go ahead if you want to say Smitty. So.
All right,
yeah, people have been calling me. Yeah, people have been calling me Michael my whole life. I don't like nicknames, but they tried to call me Waitsy when I worked at Macquarie. It just didn't work. Anyway, so you've been in. I really want to get through it. You've done so much interesting stuff to me, and you've ended in a place where, you've ended up in a place, at least for now, where you know it's getting to be kind of a popular thing to do. But you're like a computer science guy, so you've actually programmed for a while, right?
Yeah, I would say I'm a terrible engineer. So I did go to junior college for engineering up in Northern California, which is actually where like Intel and NEC and Hewlett-Packard all were back in the pre-internet days.
Right.
I actually got my start in engineering, actually customer support and doing some engineering stuff. But I would obviously, after 2 or 3 years of being on the keyboard, I came to the conclusion that did I want to see myself writing code for the rest of my life? The answer was no, and I probably because I wasn't great at it.
Fair enough.
But at the same time, it felt like such a solitary exercise. I think some people really excel at that, like put my headphones on and code all day. I love it. It was too isolation for me, so I knew right away that it was great to understand how tech worked, and I loved that I could code and understand code, but I quickly realized that I didn't want to be there. So the first job I got into outside of that was what we called sales engineering back in the day. So I'd actually go with the sales rep, dress up, but I was the nerd in the room. And I like that because it got me away from the keyboard, but the techie stuff gave me an edge.
Right, so you could humanize technology for people and explain it to maybe people that didn't fully understand. So when you moved to Hong Kong, when, at the beginning of 2000?
So yeah, it was like right around 99, 2000. And what it was actually is I was working for BEA, who had bought WebLogic, and I was part of that, I guess, inner circle of the the acquiree company. And I kept saying I wanted international experience. I was doing a lot of travel.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
Yeah, and if my boss said, I'll give you 2 cities that start with an H as a choice. And for the life of me, I figured out one was Hong Kong, and I could not figure out what the second city was. And I was looking over like a map, and what it was High Wycombe, which is near London.
Ah.
Which, from I understand, for all the people from the UK, that's a terrible place to be.
Oh yeah.
So I said, no, thank you, I'll take Hong Kong. And it was a 1-year contract, and I woke up 5 years later still in Hong Kong.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had a 2-year assignment in Tokyo, which turned into 22 years. So
yeah, that's how it happened. I think usually you do that 2 years and you're gone, or if you go past that assignment date, you're stuck.
So
I got stuck.
You
Yeah,
usually
you
get there
that.
and you meet a girl, and then you settle down. That's usually what happens, isn't it? That's usually the story when you talk to any kind of expat living.
Yeah, I guess it does. So I did Hong Kong, a little bit in China, sometime in Thailand, and then Singapore.
But you were also at Yahoo, which I find really interesting as well. Yahoo, obviously back in the day was a gigantic name in the tech ecosystem. And I'm sure that being at Yahoo in Southeast Asia was a ton of stuff that you learned that you probably wouldn't have learned if you were back in San Francisco or back in the California base. You want to run through that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize even like how big Yahoo was in Southeast Asia from like a user engagement perspective. So yeah, I was actually in Thailand. I was doing some non-techie things and needed to work again. I made some phone calls in the WebLogic network and sussed out a job in Singapore working for Yahoo. But in this interesting kind of way, I was also kind of reporting to Sunnyvale in the product teams, but also helping Southeast Asia with the product. So it was like a global product management role. And this is when Yahoo was probably still at its peak, hadn't really started to collapse yet. Not really just from the people collapse, but even just the engagement stats were quite incredible in Southeast Asia. So like, in Philippines, like you would hardly find anybody if they were on the net that didn't have Yahoo Messenger, or you go to Vietnam and, everybody's email was Yahoo. So yeah, it was incredible. We got to play with products at scale, but we also got a firsthand lesson in kind of how everything can go wrong, which I think, that's pretty huge, right? Because you can learn the positive side of how to do things, or you can learn what not to do as how to do things. And so I think at my journey at Yahoo was a lot of what you shouldn't do. And that had everything to do with like trying to figure out product when you're in Sunnyvale or let's say Philippines, or the, things you do to kind of localize too heavily or under localize. I mean, there's a lot of, I always use the analogy that like if the Yahoo was running the Facebook product, it would be a different color and a different font and a different layout in every country.
Right.
Where if Facebook obviously succeeded by not doing that, by making it the same in every country, you just maybe have your language toggle. So I think Yahoo had this like hyper localization trend, which was very expensive. But at the same time, Yahoo always had some amazingly great people. We always talk about Bleeding Purple, and just the camaraderie was huge there. But to kind of, I guess help to ride herd over the decline was not super fun, but learned a lot. And I think there'll be a Harvard business study someday about how you take something at a peak in Southeast Asia and literally just ride it down to where no one even knows what it is anymore.
Right.
Is kind of hardcore, but I learned a lot about product management. I learned a lot about managing political upheavals within companies, and I think I really grew a lot in how to survive in a big corp, because that was probably the biggest corporation I had ever worked for at the time.
Yeah, fair enough, and it's huge. I thought, like you said, I don't think most people understand like actually how big it is, even today.
Yeah.
I mean, not
at some point, I think it was 15,000, 16,000 employees when I was there, right?
Yeah, it's huge.
With even just thousands around Asia, but it was fun, and we learned a lot. And I think people used to love the products, and people used to love working there. So that was a good time. But I'm always amazed at how quick it kind of collapsed.
Yeah, I mean, that happens, right? I mean, at the speed of the internet, right? That stuff just does happen. So you left there. I was looking at your schedule, like you left in 2012. In a way, it feels like a really long time ago, but the reality is in February of 2012, I had frankly just moved to Bangkok, so it doesn't feel like that long ago.
Yeah, it feels, I mean, I think when I started jumping into Yahoo, because I was there like 2.5 years, I think the whole Asia internet journey for me was just kind of starting, even though it was really taking off anyway. But what I was doing when I lived in Bangkok, not before Yahoo, was actually not really any internet stuff. So I think for me, the Yahoo thing was, wow, like the internet journey in Southeast Asia particularly is really just starting to kick into gear, where you see just, massive amounts of people coming online. You're measuring, like we would measure Yahoo products and how many thousands of people joined per day, literally per product, just unseen kind of stuff. So for me, my internet journey for Southeast Asia and like internet commerce and things like that, that was really the beginning of it. So it does feel like when I see charts and people showing stuff about Singapore and the startup scene, I kind of feel a little old timerish, because I'm like, well, back in, but at the same time, like it's really the beginning. And I kick myself actually continually for not maybe at that period starting some sort of entrepreneur journey in one of these countries in the internet, building my own product, knowing that was the base of everything, right?
I mean, look, sometimes you're too deep in the middle of something to really understand it, but you've done a really good job, it seems to me, of figuring that out, getting involved with Spool. That sounds like it must have been an amazing experience as well.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean,
and what is Hook? What is Hook?
So Hook is so basically what happened to me when I was at Yahoo. I was helping a little bit with some of the video products, and just looking at like the bandwidth coming up, the devices coming up. The idea for me, and obviously I'm not the only one with it, was, wow, internet video is going to be big. It won't necessarily all be YouTube. And how do we deal with this? So I actually was interviewing for a job at Viki, believe it or not, and
Viki, wow,
and Spool. And honestly, the only difference was I had just had a baby and I didn't want to be on a plane all the time. And I wanted to kind of build something from scratch. So Viki was already well on its way a couple years in, and it was going to involve some travel, and I didn't want to travel. So Spool was kind of ground zero for some early approaches at how to deal with premium video content in the emerging markets. And so what it was is entirely focused on Indian content, but you could stream it anywhere. So rather than doing the geography thing, we did the content first thing, but you could be anywhere. So we had Middle East users, African users, American users, all that kind of thing. And it was started by people that were initially involved with Sony India, which used to be a startup before Sony bought it, Sony Entertainment Television. So for me, it was a chance to build something from scratch in the video streaming space. Spool's still going. It's one of these things that doesn't get a lot of press. I don't think they actually needed a lot of funding because it's actually going pretty well. And we got the ground zero, build the back end, the streaming stuff, the players, the whole bit, and very small team, but just focused on, doing that. So for me, like that was quite an interesting journey in building a product from ground zero. And then I just had decided I had been doing that one type of product long enough in one space that I joined Hook, which is a joint venture between Sony, Warner Brothers, and Singtel. And this is where you have the telcos always wanting to be the streaming provider, marrying up with the content guy to try to take on the Netflixes or the Star Hubs of the world type of thing. So that's the Hook thing.
What's your view there? Like,
well, you can read today how
iFlix just got funded for $130
million. iFlix just got funded for like the third time for many millions of dollars. So I think the journey there is there's only a few winners in this whole space, and I don't think Hook's going to be one of them. I'll just go on record in saying that. I think that the telcos aren't necessarily the ones to always pull this off. You can see in America how that doesn't really work. Of course, the telcos get so big they buy the other players like AT&T and Time Warner, but I don't think Singtel can buy somebody. So yeah, so I don't think it's going to work. But I think what I thought it could be was a very interesting project with very senior players in the industry, Sony, Warner, and Singtel, and really trying to see that could we craft something within the telco infrastructure that was better than the people who are outside of it. And unfortunately, we never got to prove that point because Singtel didn't really go that deep in creating a good product that they would push through their network. They just kind of, like you could imagine that, like, if the Singtel affiliates, your AISs and your Globes, basically were like, we will make this product super successful. You'll get some free data. We'll make payments lickety easy. When you buy your credits and your top up, like if you could just go really deep there, because these are all prepaid mostly markets, you could envision this could get interesting. But the problem you have is, well, Netflix is there and Amazon Prime's there and iFlix is there. The competition's stiff. It just didn't really come out the way it was intended, right? But I got a lot of good experience working with Sony and Warner, and that I was very thankful for.
Yeah, I mean, I have my own view on whether that type of sort of, I don't know, simulated entrepreneurship is actually going to work and create something big. I think you have to start this from scratch and without those relationships and hustle to get them, and then build something that actually has compelling value for them first before. It's just my own view on it. So we can talk about like investment theses and stuff like that. So now you've done all that stuff, and now SeedPlus. Like, it's so hard, and I know because I've been trying, right? But it's so hard to go out and raise like a first fund.
Sure.
It's just hard.
Yeah, and I think, like, let me just elaborate the journey a little bit more, because
please.
If you'd asked me 10 years ago, like, hey, would you be a VC? I probably wouldn't have said no. I would have said, like, really? No, I don't think so. Like, I don't know what that's all about, right? So what did whet my appetite, and actually this is where I always try to tell one of the life lessons here for the podcast is, be a nice person in your entire career.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll benefit from that. And I say that I had my years of not being the nice person, and I realized that's really silly, right? So one of the things I'm really thankful for is when I was at Yahoo, I got to whet my appetite with corp dev, which for everybody is buying companies. So I was the buyer, right? And at Yahoo, I got to work with David Gowdy, who's actually one of the managing partners of Jungle Ventures. Previous to that, he was at TPG. And then he was like at 11 years at Yahoo or something, one of the longest running careers at Yahoo. And we did the Copral deal together, which is, if you look at a chart of acquisitions by, let's say, exterior companies or Fortune 500 companies not in the region buying something from the region, I think it's one of the first deals ever done where a Fortune 500 company bought a wholly owned Indonesian company. It wasn't even a Singapore company. It was an Indonesian company. And I got a feel for, the deal, I guess you could call it, the art of the deal, the like integrating something, and just kind of, that M&A was kind of fun. So I did more of that type of work. I didn't really accomplish any other deals because I think a lot of people don't realize you end up working on a lot of deals that don't end up getting done.
For sure. Yeah, they don't. Right.
So for me, that was one side of this world, because I think VC and private equity and all this stuff really are financial vehicles. And one of the exit strategies is actually M&A, right? So I got to sit on one side of it and learn a lot about that. And that would be conversations even with the Yahoo CFO about deals and how these things get done, and the integration, the M&A, the due diligence. I don't think people realize how much goes on there in the big companies. So that was where I guess you could say, started my journey in thinking this stuff was interesting. And then along the way, when I was at both Spool and Hook, I did some side projects for people, actually some for TPG. One of my fun things is I was involved in the due diligence for the Property Guru deal, which was kind of, it was a pretty big one for TPG, right? And again, that was David. And then I actually, along that journey, met Hian Go from
Asia Food Network.
Asia Food Network. Was one of the nerds, he would call. And then when he started his journey into being a VC, we actually came up with an arrangement where I was a paid advisor to them and really got to, again, get deeper into the VC world, but as an outsider still, and just, starting to like it, right? Like, this might be more interesting, and I've done this other thing for years. This might be another thing to do. And then when David left TPG to join Jungle, he called me and said, hey, we got this thing we're building called SeedPlus. Not many people know about it yet. It's not formally launched. What do you think? And actually, it took me a while to even wrap my head around, is that what I want to do? But once I started talking to them, the whole Jungle family, so to speak, I realized that, like, hey, this is interesting. And then I started talking to lots of people, MSI, Sequoia, and stuff like that. And then eventually settled on this just because of, I think it fit me a little bit more, the operating principles we have. And that, to be frank, it was something they were basically allowing me to kind of run, right? So
tell me how that works. So what is SeedPlus?
Yeah.
Like, what is it meant to do? And
yeah, so SeedPlus, and again, I always tell people, and it's a great you ask it, like, what is it meant to do? Because we haven't done it yet. What it's meant to do is to be one of the premier institutional seed stage VCs in Southeast Asia. Because if you actually look around, and there are a lot of VCs, don't get me wrong, not many focus entirely on seed stage.
Right.
And do it at the level to where the check sizes are 500, 600, 700, 800 grand per deal.
Right. Most of them are 50, 75, 125.
Yeah.
That kind of
or a syndicate round of 250s.
Yeah.
But any one VC at the seed stage maybe isn't risking more than that. Where we're kind of saying, let's do what we think worked for, like, first round capital in the States.
Yep.
And that's why it's called first round, or like it's the first institution in. So what we want to be in Southeast Asia is the first institution in with a meaningful round, typically structured as equity. We usually ask for a board seat. We go through a lot of the due diligence that you might encounter in Series A, maybe not to the same level, but more due diligence than, say, let me do a safe note for 250.
Right.
And invest with some conviction and some confidence in that we're not out there to do a lot of deals. We're out there to do the right deals for us,
right,
with some level of, we're very heavily invested in both capital and time.
Right. So you're like the anti-500 startups in a way.
Yeah, and again, there's no negativity towards that, but like,
no.
where they're doing a lot of, let's do 250 everywhere, and we step back and see what that does.
Yep.
And in fact, we're in some deals with them.
Sure.
We're definitely not that, and we're definitely also not, the one where you write a lot of 50 grand checks and sit back and say, should we go in again? It's more of, we have some experimental things we do. We haven't really PR'd or announced these yet, so that's coming soon. But our typical deal would be, we would like to invest 500 to something. We kind of like to own this much. And here's how we think we're going to help you get to the next stage. Because the way we model things is, once you raise money, and I think this is one of the things that young entrepreneurs don't realize, is once you raise money, you're kind of always raising money.
Yep, you're never done. It's like a drug.
You start a venture journey where you've taken money in, and to keep, and we also tell people, some companies, maybe that's not what you should do. Maybe you should never raise money. I actually have a lot of meetings where people are always shocked, and I say, you know what? I don't think you should take money from me or anybody else. You should just go build this thing, make it cash flow positive, and run a nice business, because that's okay. A lot of people actually do quite well doing that. So we want to be the guy that basically tells people that, look, your next milestone is probably raising a Series A, and a Series A will look like this, and you'll need these metrics, and you'll need these types of revenue numbers to do it. And then based on that, let's kind of work backwards and say, what do you need for seed, and how does that work? So that's kind of what SeedPlus is all about. There's 4 of us, and we basically spend a lot of time to get a deal done, and then we spend a lot of time afterwards to help the companies wherever possible kind of get to the next stage.
So have you made investments? So have you started building your portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, we've made 5 public investments. Most of them have all been in the news in one time or another. We have some since then. They're just not public yet. I think our most visible deal would be, probably at this stage of the game, is this company called Moglix out in India. And it's just been kind of a rocket ship in that they've gone from seed to Series B actually in less than 2 years. So we were their seed investor, and then they raised A and they raised B.
So
that's
what do they do?
Talk about the most.
What did they do? How did they find? Like, how did you find it? I'm curious. Like, I see a ton of stuff. I think deal flow is like one of the most important things that a venture capitalist can have, right? So can you see the right deals? Can you get in the right deals? And can you pick the right deals, really, right?
Yep. Yeah, and I think everybody who's experienced will tell you that you can talk about all the other things, but at the end of the day, that's actually that and exits are the metric, right? So
yeah.
So I think this is one of the things. So let's step back and understand the Jungle Ventures view of this. So Jungle Ventures is obviously one of the older-ish Singaporean VC funds. There's a few that have been around the same time frame as them. They had their Fund 1 and Fund 2. Fund 2 closed last year at around 100 million US. What Jungle Ventures team between David and Amit and them were figuring out was Series A and up is a really different ball game than Series A and down. And what they wanted to do was separate institutional seed from Series A and kind of put a team on it and let them focus. So we're in the Jungle Ventures network, so to speak, because the way it works, not to get too techie here, is in Singapore, a lot of people may not realize that the venture fund industry is regulated by MAS.
Yep.
It's getting lighter as time goes on, but it's still pretty a higher bar than most geographies for starting a fund, deploying capital, all that kind of stuff. What Jungle Ventures, the tack that they're taking is let's have a venture firm where the back office capabilities like compliance, legal, finance, analyst work, due diligence is largely shared structure across multiple funds. So other typical firms in Singapore, and again, this is not like a right or wrong way, it's just one method. Other funds typically are a firm with just one flagship fund, right? So, and that's how most work. So it's your flagship. I had Fund 1, it's closed, we're now on Fund 2, and the entire team and firm is focused on that one fund, right?
Right, they rotate to whatever the existing flagship fund is.
So we are rotating within our flagship funds, but what we have is multiple funds.
Right.
So SeedPlus is essentially another fund. Jungle Ventures is an LP in that fund, but we've also have LP investments from other funds like Excel in India, Ratan Tata, and then we have other LPs that are large financial organizations like IFC, Fidelity, and then some interesting players like Cisco and stuff like that. And this is what's different about SeedPlus is that the LPs are wanting almost like corporate VC access. So rather than starting their own corporate VC fund, they've invested in us to be a seed stage fund.
Right. So they're basically, it sounds like they're outsourcing their sort of seed investment stuff to you. So they have money that they allocated to doing this, but they really don't have the resources nor the sort of ability to do seed style stuff or understand it. And they just said, let's build an infrastructure around it and institutionalize it, which is not a bad idea.
And I think we're like the farm system for them. And I think that's perfectly okay because what we get is a very interested LP. They're very interested in strategic follow-on acquisitions. They're really interested in market access. We meet with them regularly. And rather than them, and some of them have started even their own incubators or accelerators anyway, but what they say is, let's also bet some money on institutional seed, but let's let these guys handle it. And that's the model for SeedPlus. And I think it's very different than what other people have done in the region. It remains to be seen, is this the right long-term way of doing it? Because again, the results will have to speak for themselves years down the road.
Right.
But this is kind of how it's been set up.
But what's your view on this? In other words, you talked earlier about investment theses and stuff like that, right? So is there a common theme? So for me, right, so I have my own investment thesis. It's really straightforward. And it changes sort of subtly over time. But I'm just curious what yours is and how you apply that to the companies that you see and how the companies actually find you. So, you look at a lot of these sort of early stage investment businesses, right, that aren't as institutionalized as yours. And, they have a homepage and you sort of submit stuff to them. But getting in touch with them is hard unless you know them personally. Like, how do you manage deal flow And how do you decide like what you're going to focus on, and what's the thesis around what types of companies? And I don't mean what sector, because I don't think you have a sector. Neither do I, frankly. But I'm just curious, like, how you manage that whole process and what the thought process is around it.
Yeah, so we put a lot of work into the team around how to actually get a workflow around this problem, because we do get a lot of cold leads. We do get leads from our network, our advisors, our angel people. We get leads actually from the LPs. We have a lot coming at us. So one of the things we do is we do have a thesis. And what I mean by that is the things we care about investing in.
So tell me.
So at a very high level, we care a lot about automation. We think the world is just going to get more automated, both at a hardware, software, kind of people level. So just a really wide swath around automation. So one of our investments is EV.ai, which automates your calendar with a virtual robot. You can imagine automation being something like the autonomous car, but also we think the industrial automation phase has really just begun, like we automate factories and things like that. We also think there'll be personal automation where like EV, it just helps me work smarter and amplifies my capabilities. So automation is a big thing for us. The second thing for us is, and it kind of dovetails with this a little bit, is that the future of work, specifically in Asia, is going to change a lot, right? And it's not just I'm an Uber driver, I'm a Grab driver. It's, hey, I want to be a part-time knowledge worker, or I want to I'm going to do Bitcoin mining. You can imagine just all these things that the future of work's changing. But we also think the employers and the employees need new tools for managing each other, managing themselves, managing how they find work, how they get their insurance for their part-time work, all these kind of things. So we just think the future of work is going to look very different, 10, 20 years out. And how do you invest around that? The other one we care a lot about is just infrastructure. And what we mean by that is we generally will probably not be interested in a consumer e-commerce play. But if you're somebody selling something to lots of e-commerce sites to solve a particular problem, that's interesting. So infrastructure, logistics, security, software, developer tools, we just think is interesting and is obviously, I guess, as a label is more B2B-ish, but really specific to kind of the picks and shovels, like the gold miners. How do I sell something to you to help to go do whatever you do better? And then the fourth one is really around the deep spaces we see and the opportunities around, some people use the fintech label. We get more specific. We say around financial services and insurance services. So, if you ask most people and say, do you love your bank? Most people say no. But at the same time, if I said, hey, I'm this new startup and I'm going to build a new bank, do you want to use it? They'll also say no because they don't trust it, right?
They don't trust it, yeah.
So and the banks in Asia dominate almost all financial services, but we do think there's opportunities in things like credit, things like the unbanked, just better ways of maybe trading stocks, because like E-Trade pulled back from the region and there is no Charles Schwab of Asia. So we feel like there are some opportunities in financial services. And then we paint the same brush around insurance. And people, you say, do you love your insurance broker? No. Why? It's too expensive, or the premium doesn't work for me when I'm unemployed, or you can imagine a whole bunch of things. So we think there's opportunities around the consumer side of it, insurance, but at the same time, there's opportunities around the tools you might sell to the insurance companies themselves. So those are our four big buckets.
Got it.
We have reams of documents around what in those buckets we really care about, something we don't share. But what we use this as a filter to say, if you're sending me something inbound and you don't fill these buckets, we're probably just going to generally say we're not interested unless you were a lead from one of our amazing advisors or you're a lead from one of my friends. I might look, but our filter for the markets is still going to kind of win out over most of those things. And then what we do spend time on the outbound is, let's go to conferences that fit these. Let's go to user groups that fit these. Let's try to go to markets that have these problems. That would be how we would focus our actionable outbound activity. So, helps us on the inbound filter, helps, because as you know, you could just constantly be busy responding to things rather than finding investments.
Well, that's the other thing too, right? Is you have to make this decision is, are you going to be like, one of your jobs is just to go out and actively find things. You can't sit at your desk and just wait. And I know you know this, but you can't just sit at your desk and wait for stuff to come to you.
Yeah. And
you actually have to be part of the community so that the community doesn't have to come to you all the time, right?
And this is what I tell people. Like, if someone said to me, like, what is the biggest thing you're learning and grappling with as a VC that you were surprised about? And I'll tell people time management. Because, like, at least when I'm shipping product and I have engineer, like, there's a way to kind of structure your time to say, hey, we don't want to burn out. We're going to code this many hours a day. We're going to try to accomplish this in 2 weeks. And what I tell people, what VC life feels like is on January 1, I'm inside this snowball that's rolling down a hill. And it just keeps accumulating more snow as I go throughout the year, because my network grows, the companies grow, you make investments, your portfolio grows. Now you got to get better about portfolio construction. Oh, wait a sec, we got to raise another fund. Like, you can just, I suddenly realized, like, you're grappling with so many problems that your own personal time management becomes really important.
Yeah. So do you invest in a time management? Because you mentioned something about calendaring and scheduling.
We did invest in Evie so that I spend less time scheduling meetings. And believe it or not, I do think that's a big boost to my personal productivity, because I don't, I'm not on the phone or with these 5 people going back and forth. It's Tuesday at 12, okay, Thursday at 1, okay. Like, Evie just does that for me. And I'm, even if I was an investor, because I actually used it before I was, I'm basically hooked. Like, if you ripped Evie from me, I would be upset. So,
which I guess that's one of the reasons why you invest in it, is if it becomes such an integral part.
Yeah, we call it, like, if something becomes somebody's toothbrush, it's probably a pretty good investment, right?
Yeah, fair enough. What's your view on the rest of the industry, though? So you talked about institutionalizing seed stage investment. There's a ton of, Singapore is actually blessed but cursed by the NRF and a whole bunch of other things, right? Where the investment landscape gets skewed by just what I'll call too much money and too much leverage to a certain extent. So things in Singapore, right, get funded that shouldn't get funded because the risk return profile is skewed by leverage. I'm just curious.
Yeah, but I would argue that, so I always preface a lot of what I'll say next as, I am Singapore's biggest fanboy. And the reason for that is because I bounced around the region and I've seen the difference. Nobody's perfect, but I'm pretty happy with the tool set that is Singapore. So I think on this leverage thing and what we call easy money, they've been hearing that for enough years and been seeing the result that they've moved things up, right? Like, it's harder to get leverage for basically anything. Now they have leverage specific to certain sectors rather than generic investments, or like they're giving people leverage on IoT and leverage on industrial automation, but your general startup generally can't get a leverage investment anymore, from what I can tell. So I think they've moved things up the funnel because they know that the ecosystem is also moving up the funnel. So there's always a lot of activity going along, and there is easy money, but I think any ecosystem has its issues, but that the general view is there's a lot of opportunity out there, so we need to, throw it. So there's lots of competition, there's lots of seed stage funds, there's lots of incubators and accelerators, and I hear this a lot, and there's lots of funds. But generally, what I'm learning as a newish VC and being really careful about is there are actually no external metrics to judge anybody yet, because the funds are all still pretty young, right?
That's the point already.
Right. So I think until you have funds that will want to go public with their IR, or funds that the LP people will tell you, I'm really happy being in that fund, I actually got a check back. I think we're too early yet, right? I mean, most funds are basically 5 years and on the second fund. And actually, when most people are on their second fund, there's not enough in the first fund to judge you with yet, other than maybe paper gains, right? So I think the industry around this region is very young. And I think it'll remain to be seen if there's been too much thrown at something or not yet. But I'm pretty hopeful that Singapore continues to jigger and fine tune everything to be very successful. I feel that it is, but let's see what happens over the next few years.
Yeah, so if you listen to Graham and I talk, one of the things we've been talking about recently is actually what makes a great startup city. So, and again, only because, and I'm more interested in regions in particular, and frankly, I'm more interested in companies. So that's fair. People do tend to talk about, some of the great startup cities in the rest of Asia. I won't even be specific to Southeast Asia. And, we're actually going to go around to each individual city, but 6 of them, maybe 8 of them actually, and just go meet people like you and try to determine what they think is the great thing about it. Because I agree with you, right? I think there's an incredibly robust startup ecosystem in Bangkok, in Ho Chi Minh, in Jakarta. You could argue that there's one in Bali and a little bit in Hong Kong and some stuff in Japan as well. And I think all of them have their pluses and minuses, right? I mean, I asked you about Singapore, not because I think it's necessarily good or bad or indifferent, but because you're there.
Yeah. And I think it depends what you're doing, right? Like I think if I'm a startup and I'm wanting to build companies in Southeast Asia, I feel pretty strongly that there's some roadmaps to follow. One of the ones that we try to convince people of is you should headquarter your company in a really safe region or city that's easily to acquire. So when I tell a Thai startup or an Indonesian startup this, they kind of don't understand what I mean. Make your top co Singapore, right? Or, some people will choose Hong Kong, but I actually think Singapore is more powerful. And the reason for that is because we were recently talking to one of the big acquiring companies that's in the region about issues they have with acquiring. Because remember, I think acquisitions are still going to be your main exit train in the region for a long time to come, right?
Yeah, because IPOs aren't going to be the thing, because where are you going to
IPOs aren't going to be the thing. And and one of the things this guy's telling me, this guy runs corp dev at a huge company. I'm not going to say the name, but everybody would know who this company is. Right. And he runs corp dev. And I said, what do you think about the region? I met him at the TechSun conference. He said, people don't realize what we look at. He said, if I go and look at a mid-size acquisition, maybe between $5 and $10 million, which is going to be fantastic for a founder after like a seed stage exit. And he goes, in America, I know I can get it all done and dusted with lawyers and paperwork and due diligence for about $500,000 US. He says, if I go and find a nice Thai or Indonesian company at that same kind of acquisition level, he goes, I'm probably looking at 1 to 1.5 million in fees because of due diligence and corporate structures, and I got to bring lawyers, I got to translate stuff. He says all these kind of things. That he goes, if it's only about a 10 million acquisition and I'm over 10% in fees, he goes, guess who's not buying a company?
Yeah, it's not worth it.
It's not worth it. So a lot of people need to realize what you're trying to prep for. You're trying to prep to make these things easy.
Easy, yeah.
I tell people is, do a Singapore Topco, even if you're a Thai company. It's not that big of a deal, right? Make it simple. But I think you also have to look at where you're at. So I think it's VCs, I think are better off in Singapore. That's just my feel. But if you're doing a startup, you could be in these regions, but understand what you're building for. But then I also think you have to have the lens of who are you as people and what stage are you in life? Do you have kids? Do you have to send people to school? Do you need health insurance? Is it safe? These are things that I start to talk to people about that as a 40-something guy with kids, and I've lived in all these countries, I just love Singapore because I can put my 7-year-old on the bus and I know he's fine, right? And I know my wife can navigate the whole country without having to have a car, and the public schools are great. So I have these other lenses that I view this problem through versus just, is it a cool city to live in? And is our engineers cheap? To me, these are all different problems, right?
Yeah, fair enough. But I mean, I would make the case, and we can agree to disagree on this, is that I don't think as a venture capitalist you have to be in Singapore. But I understand.
I don't think you have to be, but I think that there's some reasons to maybe have your fund structure here, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
but no different than the Topco situation with the startup. But it doesn't mean you have to necessarily be here, right?
Right. Because I actually think there's a detriment to being in Singapore for actually some of the reasons that you mentioned. So I think having your company based or your legal domicile be in Singapore, if you're going to be in this region, is the right choice. I don't think there's any other choice. You don't want to have it, and people are going to get mad at me for saying this, but I'll say it explicitly. You don't want to be in Jakarta. You don't want to have your Topco be in Ho Chi Minh. You don't want it to be in Bangkok. You don't want it to be in Manila. And you don't want it to be in Japan. And there are probably 15 reasons off the top of my head that I can mention, most of which are legal and financial. But others are because I believe in removing friction from all transactions. Yes. I really
Correct.
do. I believe so. If you look at the things that I invest in, they also remove friction from life. Yep. So to that extent, I think that's really important. But on top of that, I think if you're going to invest, because what Jungle does, what you guys do is slightly different, right? Because you're investing not just in Southeast Asia, you're investing in India, you're also investing a little bit in China, but also globally as well, right? And that's one of the benefits of having Amit at the head of the business and also having David there, because they've been doing this for their whole lives. But if you're going to be focusing on Southeast Asia as an investment thesis, if that's what your thesis is to start, but you're building a global company.
Yeah, and I think this is one of these things where, like, I kind of like, if you read Ben Thompson and Sir Techrick, just to get at, I think one way to put a bow on this, you don't necessarily want to be in the soft, squishy middle, right? And I think if you're dabbling and you're only in Singapore, you're probably going to miss something. If you're going wide, Singapore's a great base, but I would also tell people, like, just go be the best guy for Thailand, and your chances are of success might be much higher than painting a really weak brush across Southeast Asia, right? Just don't be in the soft, squishy middle, right? Either have an amazing focus, or now Jungle, they can afford to be the guy that says, I'm looking at India, Australia, New Zealand, even America and Southeast Asia because my fund size is big enough. We have travel budgets. We know how to do this, and we have some experience doing it with the type of partners we have.
Right.
But don't be in a soft, squishy middle because you'll get crushed and you won't make a difference. Because we all know here that returns are hard to come by, and but I do feel that, like, the optionality of an exit for a regional business is going to be much stronger than a particular country, unless you're actually the dominant guy in a very large market space in that country. But those are hard to come by, right?
Yeah.
And dominant means you got to be, like, practically own the space, right?
Right. So there aren't that many Tokopedias, but they're right. So that's dominant in one country, and they've done a really good job of funding and growing. Yeah.
Yeah, and we see more and more Thai startups that say, hey, I just happen to be here because maybe I'm half Thai, half whatever. I love living here. The engineering teams are solid, but I'm building a global business. And I'm like, awesome. And then they'll tell you they have a nice topco structure, right? And I'm like, perfect. I see less of this in Indonesia. Maybe it'll change. I think it's because the tantalizing market size of being an Indonesian-only company overwhelms people to where they don't think about this. Vietnam, I think, still mostly focused on Vietnam. To be honest, we still feel like for today, the most regionality that we can expect to see is in a Singapore or Malaysian startup. And then we're starting to see a little bit more pockets of this in Australia and New Zealand because they always look out. But there's no one answer for this. I agree with you that your goal should be to remove friction as much as possible and get to the largest addressable market. And then you're going to have the best opportunity for funding and or acquisition.
Well, that's great advice. We've got to let this guy go, Michael. He's given us so much content in the last 55 minutes. It's been educational. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't look at time. I just look at, and Graham, you're so good at this because otherwise I would just keep going.
I'm getting out the crook ready to pull you off stage because Michael will just keep asking questions forever.
Well, because I'm interested.
Think about the listenability, the download time.
I don't care. I could go 2 hours.
We're at peak listenability.
We can always do part two.
We will do. Let's do a part two.
I think there's a lot to talk about this because I think the region is really at stage 2 of taking off, right? And I think stage 1 is going to looks much different than stage 2. And stage 2 is what I've been telling people is coming. Just look at what WeWork just did with Space Mob. Yep. There's been a lot of talk about, hey, only China's going to buy Southeast Asia. I'm a big not fan of that because we need optionality everywhere. So Agreed. I think stage 2 is just happening. A lot of people don't realize corp dev is the people that buy companies. Corp dev and most of your Fortune 500 companies is not even showing up in Singapore, right? Even your Microsofts aren't here with corp dev yet. Your Oracles aren't here with corp dev yet. So the buying has only just started. So I think we're really at the beginning of stage 2. There's a lot to talk about how to make stage 2 successful, and where the ecosystems for that. Is it going to be a city-based thing? I mean, I think there's a lot to talk about for what stage 2 is going to enable.
I agree. So with that as kind of the end of this, I would actually ask if Graham will allow me to ask one more question. And that is, just tell us you'll come back in a few months to keep talking about this, because I love this conversation, and I talk to VCs all over the region, as you know, but this is one of the best conversations I've had in a while. So I'd love to continue this if you don't mind.
I'm all about educating the market for the benefit of all of us, because one of the things I keep trying to tell people is it's not a competition right now.
Nope.
It's about accelerating the entire region. If one of these funds ends up having a monster exit, it's going to be great for everybody, right? So,
yes.
This is not a pie that we're all, taking from each other. It's a pie that we're growing together. I think there's much for us all to learn from each other. And I'm the first to tell people that I hope to meet all these people to learn from them, because, we're just really starting the second phase of larger funds, larger round sizes, more exits. It's going to be a great next 10 years, right?
Fantastic. I could not agree more.
Exciting.
Okay, let's
and with that.
Well, before you go, Michael, before you go.
Smitty, you're talking to Smitty.
Yeah, I'm talking to Smitty now.
Yeah.
Okay. Smitty, before you go, share with us a link that we can find out more about you, because you've been so open and frank with your advice. People want to connect with you.
So I rejiggered all my stuff. So I run my blog, seedvc.blog. So seedvc.blog is where I usually write, not every day, but practically at least every couple of days. And then in links to that, you'll find my LinkedIn, you'll find my Twitter, you'll find how to contact me. I always tell people, I always reply to people, and if reasonable and you want to meet up, I'll try to accommodate that. I love the Twitter. So any of these places I'm reachable. I love this course with people, so don't be shy about reaching out after this. And
great.
But seedvc.blog is the one place you can go and find all the information to get a hold of me.
We'll put it in the show notes. Michael Smith, everybody. Michael Smith Jr., also known as Smithy.
Yep. Thanks so much for this.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And as I said, it'd be thanks for so forthcoming with your advice. It's not often that we get that from people in your industry, but to be open with it and honest, I think for people listening has been great. And if you want to take that forward, then Michael has given you a link, which we'll put in the show notes, that if you want to go and connect with him, I'm sure he'll be happy to listen to what you've got to say.
Always good for a coffee.
Always good for a coffee. Anywhere in the world. And Michael, come back on as well. We want to get part 2, so we're looking forward to getting you back for the sequel.
Great.
Let's continue this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, guys.
You've been listening to Asia Tech Podcast. Find out more at www.asiatechpodcast.com.